A Dungeoneering remaster is on the horizon. On RuneScape's roadmap for this year, a content remaster was listed, but nobody really knew what it meant until the Dungeoneering refresh blog was posted. Now, Dungeoneering has largely been untouched since 2010 when it released. It has had some content updates over time, but they've gotten fewer and further in between. And with evolution of combat changing a lot of life point values for enemies, Dungeoneering was largely forgotten. Over the years, lighting changes have meant that the dungeons got really dark. It's really difficult to see what's going on. Considering Dungeoneering is a skill, which is a core progression point for players' journey through the game, it's crazy how forgotten this skill has become. And I don't even think the modern day Dungeoneering is trained in the original place anymore. People tend to find other sources of experience. So what are Jagex planning to do exactly about this remaster? Jagex admit that Dungeoneering has become quite outdated both in gameplay and graphics. Despite this though, it's been a top piece of content that players have wanted remastered. Even as recently as a month ago, the community-backed Dungeoneering is one of the most upvoted contents to be remastered. So this is officially their first remastered content project, with a release plan of early May. They start off by saying, what is a remaster exactly anyway? Because you've got reworks, you've got overhauls, you've got remasters. There's so many labels that kind of blend together. So to them, this is about re-exporting their original Dungeoneering into a new modern feeling version. So they're not changing the foundations of what Dungeoneering is. They just want to refresh it and make it more quality of life friendly for modern day standards. They say, like, for example, calling it a rework kind of implies that they would be changing a lot of things, and that's not what they're doing. I imagine most of you are familiar with Dungeoneering and know what it is, but if you don't know what Dungeoneering is, it's a skill entirely focused in the peninsula of Daemonheim, and the idea is you're exploring this procedurally generated dungeon, moving deeper and deeper into Daemonheim, floor by floor, completing puzzles, combat challenges, and testing yourself by using your existing skills in these dungeons. Each floor has a boss at the end of it. You defeat the boss, you can move on to the next floor. There's a handful of different themes like frozen, spooky purple theme, and so on. And so at the end of dungeons, you get Dungeoneering experience. Gain levels in the skill, you can move down to deeper floors. And because the floors are procedurally generated, there's a lot of randomness in how layouts look like, and no floor ever feels the same. Here we've got a picture of what the frozen floor looked like before and after the remaster. As you can see, this is what it is at the moment. It is actually quite dark. There's a very high contrast, very dark experience. So what they seem to have done is increased the blues. They've really enhanced the colors a bit. They've brightened it up. You can clearly see the walls again. They've added point lighting, it seems like, to the furnace. But you can see the graphics largely remain the same. They have retextured the floor, it looks like, because there's more information and detail in that. It looks like a higher resolution floor, but the rest seems to be relatively unchanged. Dungeoneering wasn't always this dark though. If you go back to say 2010 when it released, you could see, well, this picture has had its contrast up quite a bit, but you could clearly see the graphics a lot more. The walls were not even close to as dark as they've gotten over the years. I'd say they're still significantly darker in the remaster. This is more around the lighting that it was originally. It's a dungeon level of darkness, right? But you can see what's going on. I would say the remaster looks good. I like the changes that they've made to it. And hey, if this is still too dark for you, you can activate skyboxes to make everything very bright. So it's not a huge deal, but it looks nicer this way. Far better than what it is at the moment. They say that Daemonheim Dungeoneering already has a really good gameplay loop and they're not planning to change any of that. They think it's good, but it could do with some tweaking and improvement to make it less clunky and feel a bit more modern. They like the idea of you jumping into a dungeon where you have to gather resources and find weapons, essentially test your skills and conquer the dungeon one at a time. They want to make Dungeoneering feel more rewarding to play and also set it up for a better future where they can potentially add new things to it without feeling like they're building on top of a rotten foundation, essentially. This means that they're improving a lot of the code and the backbone of the skill, but they also want to touch on some visual effects and lighting to make it feel a bit more refreshed, though the main objective is not to update all the graphics. And really, I don't think the graphics of Dungeoneering are that bad. It's actually from a time in RuneScape where I generally liked the graphical direction of the game. It was before they started relying heavily on textures, so a lot of the models have quite good detail in them. Edges are quite defined, it doesn't feel very lumpy and weird, like there are sharp edges that really define objects. They have contrasting colors to make them stand out. So I think it was a good time for graphics in RuneScape at that point. They also say that this means they're not focusing on adding new floors, puzzle rooms, or bosses to the dungeon in this project. So they generally know what they want to do with this project, they say. But they are also wanting to share what their plan is with us so that we can focus them in the right direction. If there's anything we want them to focus more or less on, then we let them know, and then they'll prioritize the things that we would like. They also say some ideas are still being investigated, so not necessarily everything is going to go through in the end. This is an early look at something that they're starting to work on. They're confident that the majority of the things that they talk about here will be added though. So share the things that you are most excited about, ask about features that you have questions about, and what things are nice to have but you would rather focus priority on something else. And also additionally add thoughts if there's anything you feel they missed in this blog. Here they mentioned, like I did earlier, that they've observed many players primarily train using methods outside of Daemonheim dungeons. So that includes elite dungeons, tokens, sinkholes, and the beach hole, as well as microtransaction lamps from Treasure Hunter, though those don't exist anymore. And they say this is a strong signal that the core balancing of Daemonheim dungeons needs to be looked at. They start off by saying that the experience difference between floor 1 and floor 60 is very high, even when doing prestige, and so there's a strategy effectively to skip the 35 first floors and then do the higher level floors where more experience is gained. Generally, you would skip floors by putting them to the easiest difficulty possible and then just rushing through them instantly, rather than creating big dungeons out of those floors and then doing them. So they say they want to rebalance the floor experience to make all floors worth doing. This means you won't have to rush the lower level floors anymore. It will be worth doing every single floor before prestiging again. And I imagine they will do that by tying the floor experience to your prestige more closely, as to not create an unbalanced high experience rate at the low end floors. They say they will be mindful not to unbalance the early game for new players. They also say solo players don't feel like they gain enough rewards and experience compared to playing in a group, so they are planning to make solo play less punishing, but multiplayer will likely still be better. They also say they might consider removing the Dungeoneering Party Simulator item, as those have largely been obsolete since 2022. And they're planning to address the scaling issues anyway. So the Dungeoneering Party Simulator is an invention item which scales up your experience, essentially. Gives you more Dungeoneering floor experience if there's 4 or less people in the dungeon. There was a change in May 2022 that increased party size scaling to give plus 20% experience, which is why they say this item hasn't really been used since then. Different gameplay styles are not currently appropriately rewarded. For example, exploring the dungeon versus speedrunning it. So they still want to keep the highest efficiency the strongest, obviously, but maybe reduce the penalty of guide mode or give an easier way to figure out what the critical path is. If you turn guide mode on in the Dungeoneering interface, you'll get a line from the start until the boss room, essentially guiding you towards the critical path, the one you have to do to get to the boss. But then there's also extra rooms around you, and those will give more experience if you explore the dungeon fully. They also say that doing things in the dungeon, like opening doors or gathering resources, should give you some Dungeoneering experience as well. They say that this will probably make the Scroll of Daemonheim useless though, because it does exactly that. It starts giving you Dungeoneering experience when you do activities inside of a dungeon. Another problem they see is there's no monetary value in Dungeoneering. They want to look into adding resource bags as rewards for completing floors, perhaps using similar items to Motherlode Maw. Now, Motherlode Maw mainly gives completionist requirement items, but it does have a handful of tradable things as well in it. The bosses and creatures inside dungeons are largely outdated, so they're going to be looking at the stats of creatures and bosses, though they're going to be mindful of parties where a low level and high level group together. That's always been sort of a challenging topic, to be honest, because how do you create a dungeon that's still tough for a high level, but not impossible for a low level player? If you want to play together, you should be able to do that in Dungeoneering. So would personalized level scaling be something that they would have to create then? Say a maxed player would see the creature as a certain level with a certain amount of HP, whereas a lower level player would see the creature as a different kind of level with a different set of HP. And so it scales to the same percentages, but obviously it'll be different levels based on who's playing and who's seeing it. With the changes to bosses and creatures, however, they do state that they don't want to create unnecessary friction in, for example, drastically increasing life points, because that will just slow down the pace of Dungeoneering, and they don't want to do that. What they do want to do is make the bosses feel like bosses once again. So they want you to gear up to fight the bosses. They don't just want them to be a creature with a little bit more health than the rest of the creatures in the dungeon. Maybe more similar to how dungeoneering actually was when it was introduced originally. The bosses did give you a hard time. They did a lot of damage. They hurt. So you needed to bring food with. You needed to have some gear. And eventually throughout your dungeoneering, you had a certain set of equipment that you had bound to you at all times, so you didn't necessarily need to create gear, but having some food with was always useful. And I think they should pivot back to something like that. Grab some food. If you're struggling, grab some potions, and have that be like the goal for a boss encounter. One idea they draft is increasing creature life points, but reducing their defense so they're quite easy to take down. So they might do some damage to you, but you'll effectively take them down quite quickly. Creatures should also take the potential addition of Necromancy into account. Oh, they're adding Necromancy to it? Okay. And they say Elite Dungeons and Archaeology give a lot of tokens, which you use in the dungeoneering store. In a lot of cases, you get more tokens from those side activities than from training the skill itself. And dungeoneering should be the main way of getting tokens. So they aired the idea of reducing the tokens gained from archaeology and elite dungeons, and also specifically for elite dungeons, maybe changing when you get tokens altogether. So at the moment, I believe you get a chunk of tokens every time you take down an elite creature. Those are generally mini bosses in the dungeons. There are ways where people farm tokens by simply jumping into dungeons, finding a couple bosses, taking them down, and then resetting the dungeon and keep doing it that way. Maybe it would be an idea to only reward tokens once you've completed the dungeon itself. That would stop token farming at elite dungeons, but you could still keep the tokens from elite dungeons around in that case. At least that's an idea they could go with potentially, right? They do also say that maybe it's best to remove the tokens altogether from those activities. And I don't really grind tokens myself, so I don't have a strong opinion on this. I'm sure that there are people who like gathering tokens from other sources though, so maybe it would be better to rebalance it rather than outright remove it. I don't have an answer to that one really. It's not necessarily a bad thing to have multiple sources of tokens, as long as you make sure that the original source, dungeoneering itself, is where you get the majority of the tokens. They say that XP-based Gorajo cards are far too powerful, especially combined with double experience events. And they say this is incompatible with their move towards a more integrity-focused game. So they are investigating removing XP-based Gorajo cards, or they may remove the entire Gorajo card system altogether, since the non-XP cards don't really have much use. What do you guys think about that? I haven't really used the Gorajo cards because I maxed out my dungeoneering experience at 200 million before cards even were added to the game. They've largely been ignored by me. Next up, they want to talk about quality of life for dungeoneering. They say they want to remove undesirable friction or general clunkiness in the current skill. Wait, Jagex wants to remove friction? I thought they wanted to add friction everywhere. I've seen so many comments lately of people saying, oh, they're adding friction here and there. And I mean, some places they might be doing that. I don't think this is necessarily untrue, but it's funny to have the contrast here where they're removing friction, right? What are they actually thinking about doing here? They want to remove the need to bank before starting a dungeon. Instead, they would automatically bank your items for you. I guess there could be a system where if you start a dungeon, it would just deposit your inventory, deposit your equipment slot. If your bank was full, would it stop you though? I think old school's Gauntlet in Prifddinas has a system where all your items on you get stored into like a separate storage, and then when you leave the Gauntlet again, you can collect those items. That would be a way around the full bank problem. So would something like that create issues with the Iron Man game modes? I don't know. They want relevant keys and skills to be shown on the dungeoneering map. This would be fantastic. There have been some community efforts in solving this, mainly through plugins. I think that would be a great addition. It's been so long since I've done dungeoneering, I don't know what existed in the game and what was third-party add-on features that we used. Weren't there ways to like show which keys were needed where on the map? But just having the map show the door keys and skills required to open locked doors would be super useful. And going from 2 clicks to open a skill door to 1 click, that would be nice. Because as it is, you click once to unlock the door using the skill check, and then you have to open the door after the skill check. If it just sent you through after the skill check, that would be nice. allowing Ironmen and mains to dungeoneer together. I'm not going to share my Ironman opinion because it's very controversial and Ironmen do not want to hear it. I have a very traditional view of Ironman mode that does not align with current day Ironmen whatsoever. And that's not a discussion for here. So I'm just gonna let them do whatever they feel like doing. In short, I think that Ironman mode should be a solo game mode, and I know that's not how people play anymore, but that's how I see Ironman mode in my head. So Ironman mode is a single player mode, so I don't feel like you should be grouping with anyone, but that's wrong. But that's my opinion. I know that's not what people think, and it's fine. Let them do this, right? Let them do it. If it means more people can enjoy dungeoneering, then why not? I will say 100% that you should not be able to share experience with Ironman players though. There is a feature in dungeoneering where you can tick a box to get shared experience for everyone in the dungeon. I don't think that that should be available to Ironmen. Even if they are dungeoneering with other Ironmen, I think that box should be disabled always. And they also say that this change would make it more consistent with current group bossing for Ironmen. So they want to investigate how skill doors and puzzle requirements create impossible barriers for lower level players in dungeons. They say potentially here, like if you have a high level person and a low level person in a dungeon together, there shouldn't be a hard cap level requirement on skill doors, but having a higher level should make it easier to open the door, and if you're lower level, it should fail you more often before you can get it. Again, here I'm going to suggest the idea of a sort of instanced skill check, much like with the idea of instanced personal combat levels. What if each door's difficulty was player-based? Say you have 99 woodcutting, the door has a +3 over your current level, that player would have a 102 woodcutting challenge door, whereas someone with 60 woodcutting would have a 63 woodcutting door. So it would be equally difficult for both of them to get through the door, but then a potion would help them solve the door easier. You would also have to work in a way to properly present what challenge level the door is. I'm not entirely sure how they would do that. Could the skill level be implemented into the name of the door itself? Like woodcutting door brackets level 75, for example. Would that be a solution? I don't know, I'm just spitballing ideas here. They also finally want to improve the binding system. As you progress through dungeoneering, gaining more levels, you can save certain items. You get a certain amount of slots you can save items into that you find throughout the dungeons. If you find an item you like in the dungeon, you can save it to your saved items. And this item will then be brought with you between each dungeon. All other items get deleted once you leave the dungeon. I can't remember what the total amount of bound items you can have is, but I believe you can have 3 or 4 of them with you at all times. This obviously scales with level. When you're lower level, you might only be able to have 1 with you. They say they want to improve this by potentially adding a small bank inside dungeoneering, with the possibility of expanding the storage potentially. Not intended for hoarding, but should be an improvement on the existing limited loadout system. This system could use banking presets so you know exactly what items you have bound when you end the dungeon. That's a neat idea. I think that the current binding system is a little bit clunky and it could do with some love, so I think that's a good change. Here they've got an idea of overhauling the prestige system. So they say the prestige system in its current form is not very intuitive. It also punishes you heavily if you don't use it. They want to balance out the floor experience so every floor feels like it's worth doing. So they say they're fully removing the prestige system in its current state and replacing it with an end of floor buff system. So floor experience will no longer be penalized by the system, and completing a unique floor will give you a buff. So that's kind of interesting. How's that going to work? The buffs can include experience boosts, resource boosts, token boosts, damage reductions, or other things. They're aiming for 5 to 10 different buffs in total, and they will all stack. They say that the buffs are not tied to floor difficulty, so you'll just get a certain percentage worth of buff from doing a floor, and that ties into their system of not wanting you to rush lower level floors. They want you to get good results from each floor. And they say, much like the prestige system, if you have already completed the floor you're doing and gained the buff from it, it will instead count as the previous floor and give you a buff from that one instead. Your buffs will then continue to stack until you have finished all floors you can do, and then they will reset. The buffs themselves will exist between play sessions, so you don't have to feel like you're locked in. You can do one dungeon, get a buff, do something else for 2 hours, come back, and you'll still have that buff from the dungeon. You can log out, come back 3 days later, you'll still have the buff. The buff system also resets automatically when you have maximized your floor count. You don't have to reset or do anything. Now, they explained the buff system here a little bit, and it sounds like you can miss out on buffs if you do floors you've already completed. They say that you can stack yourself up to 60 buffs if you do unique floors for 60 floors. But if you repeat floors of sections you already have fully completed, you don't gain a buff from that, but it will still count towards your buff reset counter. And effectively, the buff reset counter will reset at 60 if 60 is your highest floor number. It's a little bit confusing, but it effectively encourages you to do floors that you haven't done yet. Otherwise, you start losing out on buffs. They do say that repeating floors you've already completed, though, will not reduce your experience, so that's nice at least. That means if you want to keep completing floors you have done, you can do so, and you don't get an XP penalty, but you won't gain any buffs from doing that. They also want to add new skills to Dungeoneering. They say a number of skills have been released since Dungeoneering was added to the game, but not all of them are included in Dungeoneering. First up, Necromancy. They want to add a Necromancy Ring of Kinship plus classes, add Ectoplasm into Dungeoneering, which you can get from a small ritual site in the starting room. The ritual site will include one candle, one glyph spot, and a platform and a pedestal. You can just get the candles and ink from the smuggler. They would also add necromantic runes, which you would craft through the usual rune crafting in the dungeon, though you would have to gather impure essence, and you would get that by performing a ritual on the essence in the dungeon. They would add 11 armor and weapon tiers associated with necromancy. Dungeoneering has unique armor for each class, so I'm very interested in seeing how that would look like. They say crafting this armor would require ensouled cloth, ensouled thread, and necromantic runes. Also, smithing would be relevant for weapons that require ensouled bars and necromantic runes. You could get these ensouled cloth by performing rituals on the regular cloth and bars in the dungeon. And then tier 11 armor would drop from bosses, much like the existing tier 11 armor does. So the idea behind the ritual is that it's a greatly simplified version of the overworld one, and would likely take far less time to complete rituals on. They would, however, include lesser, normal, and powerful material variants, and then also add these items to the binding system in the dungeon. They would then add forgotten necromancer creatures to the floors and remove the existing necromancers. That seems more like a name change more than anything, but yes. Update the necrolord boss to use necromancy. They want to add invention into... Invention. Add invention related doors. Okay. Yeah, they say here, adding invention as an entire skill to Dungeoneering is currently considered way beyond the scope. Can you even imagine having to perk your Dungeoneering gear with invention gizmos? That seems far too much effort. I mean, they'd have to create a whole system for disassembling things in dungeons. Sounds like a massive hassle. But adding invention doors seems fine. Also for archaeology, adding archaeology doors. That could be something like bone doors you have to chip away at or something. They say that adding archaeology as a whole skill is also outside of the scope for the project. I mean, adding them as doors is fine. They don't need to add the whole skills, right? I mean, if they're adding necromancy, they're already doing quite a lot, so. And I'd say that prioritizing necromancy is a good thing over those two anyway. Like, what would archaeology really help with in a dungeon? I am excited to see them adding necromancy to Dungeoneering, though. That sounds like a cool idea. They want to support speedrunning dungeons, and they say adding dedicated titles that will be acquired by completing floors in a certain time limit, as well as an ultimate title for getting all of them. They are looking for ideas of what the titles could be called. The idea currently is to filter them out by type of floor, so Frozen, Abandoned 1, Furnished, Abandoned 2, Occult, Warped, and then have ultimate tier titles, Bronze, Silver, and Gold for completing all floors in the time limit. They will add quick chat support to this, and they say what Dungeoneering statistics would you like most to see in quick chat. They also want to add floor time high scores. They say at minimum this would be an in-game notice board, but ideally they would like to display it on the website if possible. Next up is miscellaneous nice to haves. They say this section is very important because they want to hear our thoughts and feedback on what we feel is most important of these changes so that they know what to prioritize. One of their ideas is improving tutorialization, giving the smuggler more information. Should there be a guidebook item? Should there be UI pop-ups? Review the interfaces and update them when needed. This could be things like the map, I imagine, or the pop-up at the end of dungeons. Maybe even the party system interface itself. Are these outdated? Could they be changed? Should the existing Ring of Kinship classes be adjusted, like melee, magic, and range? As far as I can remember, you could pick certain buffs from the Ring of Kinship depending on the style you were using. Add overload potions to dungeons. Completely remove the shared XP option. They say that very few people actually use the system, and it adds needless complexity. I personally think that could be removed. It doesn't need to exist. Another idea is removing the complexity 2 to 5 options when forming a party, and instead having a low complexity and high complexity, which effectively would be an only combat dungeon or combat plus puzzles and skills dungeon. They find that very few players choose options 2 to 5. Do you agree with this? And do you normally use 2 to 5 for some reason? 6 is the standard, but a lot of people use 1 to rush through dungeons that they don't get a lot of experience from. So would removing 2 to 5 be something useful to do? Potentially updating the graphic models for bats, skeletons, and zombies. They currently use the older graphics, but a lot of the overworld ones have been updated, so maybe adding the overworld ones into Dungeoneering. There might be additional graphical options you would need to add to those creatures though. They might get slightly warped by the Dungeoneering floors. I don't know how the color differences are between skeletons, like frozen ones and the frozen floors and so on. Any potential changes to guide mode. So like I mentioned earlier, guide mode shows you the path you need to take from the starting room to the boss room on the map. I believe if you have guide mode enabled, you get slightly less experience at the moment. Yeah, here's one. Reduce the XP penalty of using guide mode. Move guide mode to the starting a dungeon interface. Improve the readability of critical path, making it easier to identify where you need to go to get to the boss. Potentially removing the guide mode penalty. Or potentially removing guide mode entirely. Do you currently use guide mode? Should it be kept or potentially improved? And then finally add loot beams and new minimap icons instead of just red dots for melee or recipe drops. So personally, out of all of these, I would like to see overloads added. I think they can remove XP sharing. I think they can remove complexity 2 to 5. I would like to see bats, skeletons, and zombies updated with their graphics. I don't think guide mode needs much changing, but maybe improving the visibility of critical path would be a good way to do it. I don't really care about the loot beam thing, if I'm honest. Remove guide mode and then improve the critical path visibility, so have some kind of visual identification in the dungeon itself about where the critical path is. So if you pay attention to the dungeon, you would see, oh, this is the direction I need to go. Like a subtle hint. It doesn't have to be obvious either. It just can be like a small detail. And that means that as you progress and explore dungeons, you'll be like, oh, I noticed that this is the pathway that normally leads me to the boss. And you'll learn through gameplay what you should look out for on the path to the boss, instead of just having to guess yourself to the boss room. I can't really answer about the first one of improving tutorialization. I don't know how difficult it is for a new player to experience dungeoneering. It's been so long since I learned how to do it myself. Maybe there isn't a need for the tutorial system at all. I mean, you're just going into the dungeon and then exploring it, right? And you learn as you do it. Do drop in the comments of the video if you've had struggles learning how to do dungeoneering yourself when trying it out. It's not a topic I can really answer. Finally, rewards. What are they doing for rewards? And they did mention they wanted to make dungeoneering profitable, so how are they going to do that? They say that the shop and trader shop are nice to haves and that they'll do something if they have time. One thing is combining the elite dungeon reward shop with the reward trader shop. That means that there's a single place where you can spend your tokens rather than having 2 different humans you have to talk to. They say this would also remove access to the elite dungeon reward shop everywhere except Daemonheim. So attribute to decluttering the world, essentially. And updating items bought from the store to start at 100% charge. Currently, they start at 20%. That seems like a no-brainer change. I like that. I don't know why they start at 20% now. It's kind of weird. They also say they want to look into the rewards available for purchase with tokens. Some existing items may be outdated, and potential new shop items could be acquired instantly by players who have built an overabundance of tokens. I don't think it's a problem that people could just instantly buy things if they have massive amounts of tokens. If you've been doing dungeoneering content for a long time or gathering tokens, then frankly, I think you deserve to just buy the things that get added instantly. We shouldn't be forcing people to go back to dungeoneering when they've done so much dungeoneering before just because there's new rewards available. In saying that, the prices on some items make 0 sense, and they have made 0 sense since release. Like the Bone Crusher costs massive amounts of tokens, but it only requires a very low dungeoneering level. There's no way just doing dungeoneering you'd have that amount of tokens at that level. So why was it always priced so high? So fixing the token prices should be a priority in my opinion. They say their philosophy is skills shouldn't be something you can necessarily complete, but rather something that you return to where there's an appropriate reward you want to unlock. So they want to include a repeatable consumable reward that people could come back to and claim if they play some dungeoneering. And you know, that could tie back into tradable resources for the overworld from tokens, you know? Maybe you could get like a herb sack with some herbs in it, maybe like an ore sack with some ores in it from doing dungeoneering. It doesn't have to be that, it could be anything. Just if you have any other ideas, leave them below. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. That seems fine. Aside from all of the things mentioned though, and consumable rewards, they want to add a variety of new things, including necromancy variants of existing rewards, as well as a new companion pet, cosmetic overrides, and functional unlocks. Right, let me give a quick rundown of what I think of all of these things. So, I like the idea of the graphical rework. I think that the frozen floor they have made here looks far better than what it was before. It's very dark at the moment. Big improvements there. I'm glad that they're looking into the balancing of experience on the skill. I feel like doing dungeoneering floors should be the main way to get dungeoneering experience. I will say, however, there is a distinct lack of low effort training method for dungeoneering. Dungeoneering from start to finish is a quite high intensity training method. And I feel like maybe there should be methods that are low intensity for dungeoneering to level it up for those players who want to do it low intensity. I mean, there is definitely an appetite for something like that because you see that with how popular and how many people do the dungeoneering hole at the beach. Now, the beach is a limited time area, so you can't do that all the time, but whenever the beach is around, there's always people doing dungeoneering in that hole. And I think a solution is to have a low experience method that is laid back for people who want to just level dungeoneering passively. I think that a method like that should not give any tokens. Tokens should be exclusive to people putting in effort into doing dungeoneering, be that through elite dungeons or through doing dungeoneering floors. As long as you're putting in some effort, you should be gaining some tokens. I do like that they're changing the experience rates for solo playing compared to multiplayer though. Seems to be some good changes in there, make dungeoneering more accessible, add some kind of value in GP to dungeoneering seems good. I like that they're rebalancing the life points and the difficulty of the boss monsters. It has been very outdated and not kept up to speed with combat changes over the years. I very much like the idea of giving more information on the map itself, like door key and skill requirements. I think a new binding system for items is a good idea. The prestige system overhaul is interesting. I don't know how I necessarily feel about it. I think it sounds better than the current system, so I do lean more positively towards that one. It might still lean towards overcomplicated, but I'm generally fine with it. I very much like the addition of Necromancy into dungeoneering, and I think it's good to update the necromancers that exist already in dungeoneering and have them do necromancy damage. That just adds to consistency in the game world. It doesn't really make sense that they use magic now when they're necromancers. Speedrunning I don't really care about, but I know that there is a subset of players that do like speedrunning dungeons, and I think this is a great change for them, but I don't think this will have a mass appeal to the wider audience. It makes me think back to when speedrun worlds were added to old school, and there was a lot of hype around it at the start, but they've largely died off and become pretty much abandoned since then. And there was a group of players really into it, whereas most players didn't really care about it, I feel like. Overall, I will say that I'm very happy that they are remastering dungeoneering. It has needed love for a long time. It is very outdated. It almost does feel like dungeoneering has been falling apart on itself for a long time, so I very much like that they are doing something with it. That said though, I don't think any of these things would make me do dungeoneering over again. I'm not generally the demographic for these changes. It's mainly aimed at people training dungeoneering still who haven't quote-unquote completed it yet. So there's nothing really here that would make me want to do dungeoneering, and that's okay. The update doesn't have to be aimed towards me or completionist players. Like I say, I'm very happy that they are updating dungeoneering. It definitely needs it. They do say that they're adding new rewards. That's something that I would definitely want to check out. But then there's also the potential that I have enough tokens already to just purchase those things without having to really engage with new dungeoneering. Is it a problem that I wouldn't be doing the update when it comes out? Not really. I think for anyone who still has dungeoneering to do, this is all great changes. And I would say that the community largely agrees with that. 97%. That's crazy. Though I can tell you something that they don't love, and that's the ferret room. Retire the ferrets. No more ferret room. Truthfully, I completely agree. They're so annoying. Ferret room would be more tolerable if they weren't so buggy and janky. They shouldn't be able to clip through traps. I actually realized it's not a bug. You just failed to catch them. No, I don't think it should be possible to fail to catch them. And if you don't have the right hunter level, it just won't tell you and it will just fail. I have 120 dungeoneering and hard moded every single floor. Please imagine the exhaustion in my heart as I say the next sentence. You can manually catch the ferrets? It's hell to do solo, but yes, it's so nice, everyone bonding over their mutual hatred for ferrets. Wait a second, are you Thok in disguise? Yeah, either make the rooms not suck or just delete the rooms, please. Don't make new people suffer the way we suffered. You know, some people actually like the colored one. The portal one just sucks though. This person always made their friend complete the ferret rooms. But yeah, what do people actually think other than the ferret room sucks? Mod Luma says they're reviewing the store costs as part of the rebalance. One person asks that they announce the store prices for the tokens before the update so that people have time to not spend their tokens if things get rebalanced, and that seems fair. There are some comments here about low-level rewards costing so many tokens, so it doesn't make sense to have them be those levels. Hopefully those are things that they would look into. This person thinks that interacting with Daemonheim should be the best way to get tokens, and I agree with that. This person says the only thing that you need to change about elite dungeon tokens is making them all be given out at the end of the dungeon, or at least at every major boss in the dungeon. Here's a janky interaction. They say that the out of combat timer isn't synced up when you're actually out of combat with EOC. It's synced to out of combat with the old combat system, so there's no visual indication, and Modluma says they're looking into that. There's a lot of hate for the prestige system and rushing low-level floors, so I think it's good that they're trying to make every floor matter and give decent experience. It is very true that a lot of the rewards from Dungeoneering, like Chaotix for example, have been outclassed by newer content, and so it doesn't really feel exciting to unlock them anymore, unless you're around that level when you're doing Dungeoneering, in which case they are still decent items, but there are probably easier items to get than Chaotix. There is an idea of making a Chaotix scale up in elite dungeons, so they sort of tie into the whole Dungeoneering theme. I mean, that's an idea. I don't know how I feel about it personally. It's not something I would find useful, but here's someone bringing up, will the sagas be updated? There's a lot of glitching and graphic problems in those. They say that's outside of the project scope as it is at the moment, which is unfortunate, but you have to put a certain scale on how much you can tackle in one go, right? I'd say fixing the core of Dungeoneering is more important now, and then they can tackle sagas later, potentially. Modluma also says there's more quality of life things they have planned, but they didn't want to list everything in the blog because it would get really long, so that's fair. It also gives players the chance to suggest things and potentially get those added to the quality of life list as well. See, the problem with my opinions of Dungeoneering is that I don't generally remember a lot about Dungeoneering myself. It's been so many years since I've done it, so I don't feel like I can properly comment on what it needs and what it doesn't need, but I know it needs love. It's been over a decade since I completed Dungeoneering, so it's so outside of the range of knowledge that I have these days. But there's a lot of good feedback here from players, a lot of puzzle rooms that players feel are janky and would like updated. Do make sure to add your voice to this if you have any opinions. Here's a person who has a Dungeoneering ring in their name, so surely they must know a lot about Dungeoneering. Gathered over 1 billion Dungeoneering experience across multiple accounts. Helped lots of people reach their goals with it. They say that getting rid of rushes sounds positive. Solo play getting a buff sounds great. They're unsure how they feel about Dungeoneering experience from actions and floors. I mean, that's been a thing for a while if you've had the scroll, but they say, what if you go with a speedy 5-person team and you're the slowest in the group? Does that mean you don't get as much experience in the dungeon because you're not interacting with things that others are? Resource bags sounds positive. Their opinion of stats on bosses and creatures. They say, do you remember when Dungeoneering floors would take 1 hour? Please don't add time locks where doing a mistake would cost you 3 to 4 extra minutes. They're effectively saying don't over buff the enemy's life points. Dungeoneering was largely balanced around dungeons taking far longer than they do right now. Dungeoneering was never meant to be 10 million experience an hour, right? You were never supposed to go from 99 to 120 in a day, right? So, but there's definitely a balance here. True, they don't have to take super long, but they don't have to be super fast either. I'd say that the life point changes to creatures and bosses will probably be the most challenging thing to get right in the remaster itself. Right now, monsters are a joke. They definitely need to be increased, but just how much is the question. Through Gorajo cards, you can push Dungeoneering up to 5 to 10 million experience an hour. Without these, would 2 million experience an hour be too overpowered? I think they should benchmark the experience rate around the same as heists for thieving, because those also go to 120. And those are like 2 to 3 million, right? Maybe even slightly more than 3 million experience, 2 to 3 million an hour. Obviously, if you're super fast, you can go higher than 3 million. And that seems good to me. If you're really good at Dungeoneering, you can push over 3 million an hour. If you want to take your time, maybe you'd get 1.5. Daemonheim Dungeoneering is an active training method at the end of the day, so it should give active training rates. And then, like I say, if they add some kind of alternative, some passive way of leveling up, you'd want that to be a lot slower. This person's very happy with the quality of life updates. Also, gatestone markers to the map as well would be useful. They think that the soft skill requirement for doors sounds interesting. They agreed with me that the buff system sounds a little bit too confusing. They're basically instructions unclear. They would like more information about that, but they are a big fan of it overall, and I am too. They like that new skills are being added. They say that speedrunning is all they've been doing for years now. And despite that, they say they've never thought, damn, I wish I could show off this in the title. But they say it's a nice little thing, I guess. And yeah, I think that speedrunners for Dungeoneering have just really done it because they want to challenge themselves. They say adding overload potion creation sounds interesting because the mainscape meta right now is podding up before you enter a floor. They like XP share being removed. A lot of people actually turn that off when they start doing dungeons. Removing complexity 2 to 5 sounds good. It would kill C2 fishing and woodcutting though. Not sure how many people train that way. Having guide mode on is actually saving them way more time, so the XP penalty hasn't actually been a problem. This person is super excited. Check out their tag. Did somebody say remastered dungeoneering? They spent 8 to 16 hours every day, all of October, to create concept art and updated graphics for Dungeoneering. Every boss, almost every armor, every slayer mob, floor design. We have to check that out. That sounds insane. How you found the time to have 16-hour days of just drawing up concept art is beyond me, but here they got a concept art for the Master Cape. So currently it has white trim on it, which is why the inverted version is white rather than, you know, black from the particles. So here they did a design where the inverted one is more brown, has the lighter brown on the trim. This is very similar to Hunter Cape, so there's already a cape with that color set. I'll link this in the video description so you can check out the full resolution images. Here they've got a boss concept, Calgare the Warmonger, World Gorger, Shuko Rabaha, yep, Hope Devourer, Dreadnought. I like what they did with the glitching. Has Blink always been a woman? I've never noticed. Isometric concept art of the warped rooms. Edemu being like a soul coming out of skeleton. Creepy. Celestial catalytic book and wand. Cool. I really like the armor. What have you done with that? Here's more concept of the book itself. I can see why this took you so long every day. There's so much detail in these things. Yeah, so here's a closer look at the armor. Damn, look at the detail. This is crazy. That looks so good. I mean, the in-game model already looked cool when it was released. A lot of people really liked the armor from Dungeoneering. This looks fantastic though. They've even sculpted the celestial staff out of clay here. Spirit Bloom honestly looks so cool too with this concept art. My only concern would be how would it look in-game if you zoom out a little bit? Would there be too much detail in it? That's always a thing. It's hard to translate concept art detail into in-game detail because if it's overly detailed, you lose out a bit on the silhouette. Iklegar the Thunderous we've got here. Added some more lightning to his chest. Cool. I do like the glow from the chest itself. Like the power is like almost seeping out of the demon. Runebound Behemoth looks cool. Kind of creepy with the tentacles, but I like that. Everything from the occult floors should have a kind of creepy, eerie vibe to them, in my opinion. And this one too, Flesh Spoiler. Hash gonna hack. Here's the Flesh Spoils. Oh, look how cool the Necrolord looks. You know what? The first Necromancer gear could have looked this awesome, and then we got the dorky helmet. What is that? Look how cool this dude is. I have beef with the first Necromancer outfit. I am not happy with how that helmet turned out. Gravekeeper. I love that redesign. That's actually pretty cool. Live model looks so bad in comparison. I love myself some Necromancer tea bags at the start here. I'm excited to see the official designs because like they're obviously going to have the same color as the materials in Dungeoneering already. There's some concepts of the Necromancer armor tiers. Occult ritual site. Oh, that's so cool. It is just a human in the live game, isn't it? So turning it into like a corrupted centaur is a cool idea. Night Spider. Ooh, I like the smoke that's coming off of it. And this Shadow Silk hood looks amazing. I love the concept of that. I mean, I really liked the original one too when I was doing Dungeoneering back then, but this is such a cool hood. It retains the eye from the original, but it just wraps your face in, I would assume, spider silk, right? It fits with the theme too, because the idea of the Shadow Silk hood is that creatures in Daemonheim don't recognize you as a threat, right? You blend in, or they can't see you. Only a couple creatures can see you and attack you. Evan, Carl, I am impressed. This is some insane dedication you've put into this. Holy crap. You can tell they've put so many hours into these concepts. This crazy amount of work, dude. Huge props. I just have to give you a round of applause for that. I'll have a link to the art station here if you want to check these out in more detail, read the comments and everything on the images themselves. It says that the JMods have seen this and they've been featured a couple times in different art pieces, so potentially some inspiration has been taken from these artworks already. And that's the early look at the Dungeoneering Remaster. Let me know what you think of the changes in the comments. I think it's great that they're looking to refresh Dungeoneering. It badly needs some love. A lot of promising ideas here. Would love to hear what you guys have to think. Drop a like, and I can't wait to see how this project unfolds.